Welcome back to another visit of the Wonders Library, dear Wanderer. We're going to head back to the Hidden Nest, back to King Shash's shelf, where we will pick up the first book we can find. Its name is Homicidal Intercourse, and before we begin, I must warn you, there is sexual content involved in this. If you do not appreciate that, I encourage you to move on to the next book. But, without further ado, let us begin. Homicidal Intercourse. Content warning: general eroticism / sexual stuff. There I was on the 49th floor of the Hotel Gallic, room 4917. A low-caliber sniper rifle pointed at the cranium of Wallace Gotti, one of the biggest business boys in the tech sphere. I vaguely remember the steps I had endured, fleeting memories carrying me, clothed in office attire, up an oft-forgotten fire escape. A quick peek. Yes, I still had them on. It was questionable, the level of cleverness I retained when my brain was kicked out, but the implants weren't designed so people could make smart decisions, only the tough ones. Clearly, watching the paint dry wasn't expected, but foreseeable. And frankly, there were much worse times to be kicked out. A point-and-shoot lulled my mind out of the haze and monotony of societal life, and the bulb of excitement jolted me. Gotti paced around his apartment, lofty and cream-colored. They all seemed to like cream. Stilted tones aching for a violent release. One I could provide in .22 Magnum. He ranged out to about 400 yards, a distance my simple telescopic sight would close, and one which any self-respecting police station assumed would need a targeting device. I admonished the abhorrent skill of the new era, but I had to admit it let us play at ease. After all, that's what split the criminals from the profiteers. The crims got paid cheap, disposable one-time scraps, while the profiteers got paid a salary, per job, and consumable figures. I couldn't help but relish the rush of being kicked in, your identity flowing as a newsreel of all your merits and side notes of failures. Some loved it, some didn't. The pleasure nearly brought me to orgasm. Several seconds after my mentality had digested its senses, it was slammed with near-cold darkness. It was well lit in Gotti's apartment. A physical survey revealed I wore sunglasses at night. Funny. A simple-minded solution would have been to remove them, but my unwritten professional sense demanded I keep them on for no one and everyone. A triumph of value that drove the egotistical masturbation of the kick-in to shamefully blissful levels. Such were the pleasures of the job. In Gotti's apartment, he lay on a cushioned sepulchre, an increasing pressure in myself, nearly driving the penultimate nail when a dissonant knock, rapping in my left ear, alluding to having bugged the apartment prior to my little escapade. Oh, how devilish yet fun. He answered the door after a set or two of knocks, allowing inside and escorting a rather petite yet buxom woman, or lady, fairly. She was clothed less than scantily. A bath towel could have covered up more than she currently was. One of the Brown Oaks call girls. A fair shot, it was also his favorite. Dragging him to the bedroom, she removed her clothing with the skill of a talented marksman trying to hit a dame at 2 feet away. They shared a naked embrace on the mattress, and he took her, as they had taken my thoughts. After all, they were no different than I at this moment. Their brashness and loudness, enough so that it forced me to rip the earpiece out, at making love so close and obvious by their open window. The surely intendant voyeurism matched my own little show I performed for them, chambering my rifle in a match of physical act to mental wit. I surely could last longer than he could. The ace of a profiteer with the analytics and pleasure for business would most definitely overload the next kick-in. I almost quit in excess so I could manually program a kick for the surefire job well done. The police would be baffled and livid, fearful for the inevitable retaliation for whatever bigwig corporation he worked for. They were all interchangeable and easily angered. The law would search for the killer, no avail, and most likely pin it on the whore to avoid too much of a paycheck cut. He could see the headlines. Prostitute murders businessman over jealousy, more on page 4. A story would be concocted for the greedy minds of the public, not dissimilar to prostitutes of sensationalism. It would be ecstatic, gratifying to read. I couldn't hold it in. I shot a little early, but the deep crimson and brain matter staining their tryst let me know I had hit the target. Time was of the essence now. Pack up, quick, hit home. A scream from the apartment, the usual. The next kick in and out was something I couldn't hold out for. I deliberated, waiting for a job, but I knew the unadulterated pleasure that was interred in my brain. I envisioned the act again and again, where it hit a sexual fervor in me. Frankly, I didn't particularly care for the physical anymore. It was the mind, and I was hooked on my own thoughts. Such was the pleasure of the job. A rather curious tale, donated to the library by Jackal Related. But we must move on for now. The next book appears to be a letter. Let's check it out. Excerpts from the transcribed journals, manuscripts, and letters of Lady Juanita Del Rio. 3rd of June, 3004, or thereabouts. Keeping time while traveling is difficult. Darling Maria, you've asked for more stories from my other journeys, so that's what I've decided to write about this morning. Here I'll tell you of a most curious cult I've come across in my travels. From what I can tell, the immortal monks of the Great Plateau worship no deity. Their entire focus of their cult is on the study of the self. They need not rely on great numbers of converts because they possess a curious technology with which they replenish their numbers. When a convert spends a year within a monastery or a slow caravan, a concept I shall further describe below, having proved their devotion to the strict rules of the cult, they are asked if they would like to remain with the priesthood for the remainder of their days. If a convert answers in the affirmative, a surgeon, every monastery or caravan typically has at least 2, alongside 2 physicians, will take samples from the convert and then medically sterilize them. It is much easier to remain celibate if one does not possess means of intercourse. Here, I will also mention the persons of both sexes are admitted into every sect. The immortal monks do not recognize gender and address each other by a word best translated as sibling. The bodily samples of the new monk will then be taken to a refrigerated section of the monastery or to a special electromotively cooled motor cart of the caravan, where it shall be preserved for purposes that I will eventually make clear. The new monk is then tasked with writing an autobiography, describing their life in as much detail as possible up to the moment of initiating the autobiography. From there, the monk's primary tasks outside maintenance of the monastery entail studying the history of the cult and authorship of a daily diary. Each monastery or caravan has many schools wherein monks are taught the necessary tasks for upkeep of their own sect. So the typical day of an immortal monk proceeds thusly. At sunrise, an alarm sounds, waking all within the sect. Every monk is asked to spend a few moments writing about their dreams or passing thoughts from the night prior. When the monks convene in whatever dining area they possess, where a short mantra is uttered, There, they all help in preparation of the day's breakfast, usually a hearty sort of porridge that has fruits within it, when such are available. They eat quickly and quietly, help each other with the washing, then set about their individual tasks. If a sect cares for livestock, those will be tended to first, usually by the entire membership of the sect. The craftsmen and mechanics and carpenters will then set about repairing furnishings within the campus. The technicians will set about their secretive tasks. The tailors and weavers will go to their workshop. The archivists will go to their library. The missionaries shall scout the path ahead of the caravan or set out towards the nearest village or city for trade. Motorcart drivers will set the caravan into motion, and the elders of the sect shall discuss various decisions that must be made within the sect. I will mention here that every sect of immortal monks will always have some children with them, who are cared for by a caste of monks referred to as educators. When the sun is highest in the sky, an alarm sounds, and all monks make their way back to the dining area, where they all speak a short mantra and work again to make their porridge, this time served with bread, cheese, meat, or some other source of protein. Upon completing their luncheon, whatever monks still have tasks to complete set about them. Usually, there are few and far between. The monks with no specialized tasks to complete help with livestock and crops. Then all convene in the library, where special electric tomes are studied. I shall detail the contents of these tomes soon. Approximately an hour before sunset, sometimes later in more northern climates and earlier in late summer, the sect's elders will call all monks within the library to the dining hall, where reflections on the events of the day are shared and decisions for the sect are announced. Upon conclusion of this meeting, a third mantra is uttered. No monks, I asked, were willing to translate these mantras for me, and supper is prepared, usually consisting of cheese, bread sweetened with honey or fruit preservatives, and wine, though sometimes there is beer or meat. All monks will then return to the library and resume their studies until approximately 2 hours after sunset, when a fourth and final alarm sounds and the monks retire to their quarters. The monks usually write about the events of the day in their journals before finally laying down to sleep. The slow caravans of the immortal monks are a curious thing. Each is a monastery in itself. Upon the roofs of the dozen of motor cars are black tiles I am told can take the very power of the sun and turn it into electricity. I was skeptical at first, but every motor cart within the slow caravans has electric lamps and all manner of power appliances. The slow caravans are called such because the caravans forego established paths and only move a mile or less a day. Each motor cart within a caravan serves a purpose. The foremost motor cart houses the six missionaries, who act as scouts and surveyors in addition to their role of communicating with the outside world. The following cart normally houses the oldest monks within the sect, as well as a small meeting hall within which important matters are discussed. Following the elders' carts are general housing carts, containing bunk rooms for every member of the sect and usually some room for spare guests. These are followed by the library cart, which can seat every member of the sect, with room for spare texts. Next is the dining cart, which is typically quite large and can easily seat every monk in addition to holding a kitchen large enough to cook food for the entire sect. Then there are food stores and usually several farm carts with open roofs to let in sunlight for the crops, followed by livestock carts and motor carts for every other conceivable need the slow caravan might have. Special occasions within a sect are common. If a guest, such as myself, is in the midst of immortal monks, they'll be cared for and shown much of the sect's and indeed much of the cult's inner workings. If you have items or currency to trade for their hospitality, they'll accept it, but will not demand it. If you are knowledgeable in some skill or other that's of use to the monastery, and offer your labor or wisdom, they'll treat it much as a physical item for trade and gladly accept it, but again, do not demand such. They often have ample quarters. Many missionaries and slow caravans seem to operate on a skeleton crew. Many people go to the immortal monks as guests and become converts. I nearly befell this fate, but I have a mission and must complete it. I cannot do so within the halls of the immortal monks. Finally, initiation of a monk, typically signified by a bodily sample being taken and their bodies being surgically sterilized, is a cause for celebration where all but the most vital tasks will be ceased and the higher quality wines and liquors flow freely. The death of a monk, whether natural or through happenstance, is a somber occasion at the monastery. The monks will exhume the oldest corpse in the graveyard, usually quite thoroughly skeletonized, move it to the monastery's catacombs. Then they bury their fallen sibling in the newly opened grave in silence. These graves have stones, but the gravestones bear no name, merely a plot number. In a slow caravan, the body will be taken to the cooled motorcart for temporary storage while the sect waits for missionaries to return. When the missionaries return, they will be tasked with learning the local funerary customs. If the deceased can easily be honored as locals, they are. If they cannot, the medical motorcart has a crematorium where the deceased is cremated, again, watched on by the monks in silence. The ashes will then be stored until a local is found where the urn can be interred without disrupting local culture. Here is where I must state the purpose of bodily samples of every immortal monk being stored indefinitely, and thereby where the name comes from. This shall also explain the presence of children within every sect. Every sect of the cult possesses a means of growing a human fetus from a small cell sample. I was told of these electric rooms, but not permitted to know their actual location within any monasteries or slow caravans. This is why the sample is taken upon final initiation to the cult. To create an immortal life without permission of the first to possess the cell line is considered a great heresy by all immortal monks. But upon death, an immortal monk is guaranteed to be revived in this way. After 10 months of gestation within these electric wombs, infants are born identical in every way to their predecessors. They'll be raised within the monastery until they're 15 years old or thereabouts. Some sects wait until the person is 21 or only 13, whereupon they will be offered to resume their old position within the monastery. Most guests of the immortal monks who learn of this path to immortality become monks to achieve it, and most persons born within a sect accept the offer as they know no other life. The electric tomes studied by every immortal monk contain their first autobiography as well as every journal they've kept throughout their many lives. However, an occurrence I've witnessed on some occasions while visiting various monasteries or traveling with slow caravans is what some immortal monks call the final life. The average life of an immortal monk is approximately a century. If, in all that time, an immortal monk cannot read all of their many autobiographies, their next incarnation will not be offered a permanent place within the sect, instead being given the best education the sect can offer and being sent out with a copy of their electric tome, and whatever possessions they can carry with the next batch of missionaries. This event is by far a more important event than any funeral held by the immortal monks. The final life of an immortal monk is when the fantasy of immortality the monks anchor themselves to is shattered. A monk leaving the cult, especially one who did not complete their study of self in the most recent past life, is cause for a bittersweet celebration within a sect. Speeches and documents detailing the monks' contributions to the monastery over their many lives will be shared, wine and tears will flow, gifts will be bestowed upon the former monk, and a great many embraces will be held on their final night within the cult. It's strange to think these people are both centuries old and mere younglings. They are cast from the only home they know to a strange world that will not understand the true weight of the formal immortal in their presence. I saw this ceremony once on the northern ridge of the Great Plateau. The monk was a woman of unclear ancestry named Wilhelmina Michaels. This particular slow caravan had allowed her to stay as a student of their mobile university until she was 21. She was quite the mechanic and had a way with the bees kept aboard the caravan. She was nervous about her departure, but the elders of the monastery and her educators seemed quite confident she would do well outside their halls. As it happens, on another trip that took me through the same region some years later, I ran into Wilhelmina, no longer resident of the Great Plateau, but of a small village west of the northern ridge. She was valued in her community, having helped rebuild the power plant and devise an alternate fuel scheme far cheaper than imported diesel or kerosene. She said she sold her tome, undoubtedly countless centuries of journals, invaluable wisdom from bygone ages, to a university student studying the history of the immortal monks. I highly doubt it holds as much value to them as it did to Wilhelmina's. She goes by Billy now, she told me. Previous incarnations in their desperate ploy for both immortality and deep self-understanding. Definitely an odd bunch, but I'm no longer young. As my mission draws to a close, I'm tempted to offer myself up to a passing slow caravan. Take me, O immortal monks, for I fear death and would offer my twilight years for passing chance at your mechanized reincarnation. Ha! Wouldn't that be a curious end to my travels? Dearest Mira, I wish you could join me in my seemingly never-ending mission. Perhaps someday you will. Until then, I will update you on my travels. Never forget that I love you. J. A curious letter from Lady Juanita Del Rio. I am curious about more, and it is noted that this is an excerpt, and there is more to be read, at least elsewhere in the library. Well, perhaps someday we'll be able to reach that, but for now this is where our time will end. Thank you very much for coming, dear Wanderer. It has been an honor reading for you, and I wish you luck out there. Make sure to feed your pet if you have one, or look up cat pictures if you don't.